Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you all for tuning in. I had to do a little bit of a redo there. Was going through some audio issues, but we should be primed and ready to go for another great edition of the show. And on this show today, we're going to be recapping that Monday Night Football game that took place last night between the Giants and the Steelers. You're looking around the waiver wire, seeing what hidden gems you can pick up ahead of Week 9. Continuing our positional rankings as well with our running backs and wide receivers, and concluding today's show with my reintroduction of the Fact versus Fiction segment for this show. My bold fantasy takes that I'm either going to debunk or justify. But without further ado, before we get into our day's show, I do want to remind you that if you want to view more exclusive short content or other things such as this throughout the network, or even in more podcasts that we have distributed to you, consider liking, following, and subscribing to the show and the network as a whole. Great way to support us. But another way that you can support us more directly is through the use of the Super Chats, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. They, like I said, are a great way to contribute and interact. You can either click that $ in the comments section, leave a tip or donation, or also just leave any burning questions, comments, or concerns you have throughout the show concerning anything. It doesn't even have to be show related. It's a great way to interact and just makes this show that much better. Without further ado, let's jump into our first segment of the day here. Like I said, talking about that Monday Night Football game between the Giants and the Steelers. And it was a very frustrating game for many reasons for both sets of fans. I guess for the Steelers, in terms of this game, it was more about the chance for you to get a blowout victory rather than anything to do with the structure of the game, because you still won it, but you won it in a way that was less comfortable than it felt like it should have been. And for the Giants, you really feel like you can't get out of your own way right now. Whether it be the penalties, whether it be that comical 2-point conversion try that you had, or the late drive that ended with a Daniel Jones interception. It just feels like the Giants keep on shooting themselves in the foot over and over again, and they can't find any sustained success to take with them throughout the season, or translate into wins for that matter at this point. But kudos to the Pittsburgh Steelers for winning this game, because it certainly felt like there were times when the Giants looked like they could get back into this game, but the Steelers just looked a little bit more ahead of schedule in this one. And with all those calls getting called back, the touchdowns that the Steelers had, this could, like I said, have been a blowout. But I certainly feel like the Steelers get another good win. They're heading in the right direction. This is a team that's very dangerous in the AFC North right now. Obviously, a lot of people talk about Baltimore, but this Pittsburgh team, I just feel like, is better equipped to win tight games. Whereas Baltimore, yes, their offense is so potent, but their defense has had its struggles. They've proven that they don't necessarily look the best when they're trying to close out teams they should beat. We saw it with Cleveland this past week, and we saw it a couple weeks ago against Las Vegas. So look for this to be a very tight divisional race between Pittsburgh and Baltimore, because Pittsburgh truly looks like it could have a reckoning there. Now let's go over some of the key stats in this game from a fantasy perspective, because there were some interesting performances, interesting developments as well in this one. Let's start off with Russell Wilson. Very efficient day for him. Not going to say it was his best performance from a fantasy perspective by any means, but it does warrant mentioning here because of the fact that he just opens up so many different avenues for this Pittsburgh team. I was watching First Take, and Jeff Saturday was talking about how, if this were Justin Fields in this offense, he would try and use his legs a little too much, and it kind of stagnates the run game and thus doesn't open up that much downfield passing, whereas Russ comes in, and even though he's not as efficient as a runner than he was in his past, he still opens a lot more avenues in the pass game with his play action skills under center and his ability to operate out of structure. And that's what he showed in this game. So while it wasn't necessarily a fantasy performance to write home about, it was performance that proved that he's the right answer at the quarterback position for the Steelers going forward. 20 of 28, 278 yards, 1 touchdown, 13.82 fantasy points for him in this one. So overall, not necessarily a humdrum performance, but a performance that's a solid foundation for his skills as a passer and for his skills in this particular Steelers offensive setup. And then another aspect of the Steelers win that I want to point out is their defense. Talk about a very invigorating defensive performance, especially from a fantasy perspective. And I saw it firsthand because they were my last quote-unquote player standing in my fantasy football team, and I needed 9 points from them. And they were right there on the edge of almost losing me that game. But those 2 turnovers proved key, won me my game, and I'm very happy. Overall, 13 fantasy points, 4 sacks, 1 fumble recovery, 1 interception, and of course, that 1 touchdown that we'll talk about when we talk about Calvin Austin's performance in this one. But overall, the Steelers' defense, yes, there are ways we can score on it, and they definitely look a little bit more vulnerable than they've had in the past, but it's still a unit that can get the job done, especially against teams such as the Giants. And going forward, that's the reason why I feel like the Pittsburgh Steelers aren't paper tigers. Their defense is opportunistic. They have 2 pass rushers that can wreck a game plan against opposing offenses. And most importantly, they close when it matters. Those 2 turnovers that they generated were biggest plays of the game. And it could have been a different game had those not occurred. And especially in fantasy. Like I said, me viewing it firsthand. But at the end of the day, they're a defense that you can constantly rely upon to, when the going gets rough for them, find a way to clamp down when it matters most. That's what they did in this one. And then let's talk about Calvin Austin's performance, because this is a guy who not a lot of people were expecting to step up in this Steelers wide receiver core. Not expected to step up in a special teams perspective, but he had that special teams touchdown. He had that touchdown catch. In fact, 54 yards off 4 catches for him in this one. But at the end of the day, I feel like Calvin Austin's performance warrants a sense of intrigue in that I don't necessarily think the Steelers need to panic in terms of trying to find a wide receiver to complement what George Pickens and Pat Freiermuth bring to the table. I think Calvin Austin does it to great effect. And so that's why this performance from him was so integral to what people will think of the Steelers moving forward, because that might be right now the only point of contention people will have about the Pittsburgh Steelers going forward, because a lot of people are hopeful of this team, but they've always been saying, oh, they need another wide receiver to complement Pickens to kind of work underneath, open up even more avenues for this team. But right now, with the way their offense looks, with the newfound potency in the run game, with Najee Harris, with Russ being so effective in play action, opening up avenues for his tight ends, opening up downfield passing game for Pickens, Calvin Austin being a nice secondary piece really goes to show that Pittsburgh is going to ignore all those suggestions from all these pundits and stay true to who they feel they are. And Calvin Austin's a huge part of that credo right now. So, kudos to the Pittsburgh Steelers again for this well-rounded, efficient performance. And kudos especially to their defense, because I would think they were the stars of the game in that regard for them, because of the fact that they were able to get those turnovers when they were needed. And on the Giants side of things, this was a very frustrating game for the Giants, because they had put together, in certain points, drives where it looked like they could find a rhythm here. And not for nothing, I'm not going to indict Daniel Jones this game for 1 pick, because in all reality, he'd had some questionable moments, but he made some big throws, took advantage of the looks the Steelers defense was giving him, especially in the secondary. And most importantly, they still had an opportunity to drive down and tie this game and send it to overtime before he threw that interception. Yeah, it was 24 of 38 for 264 yards and that 1 pick. But the main problem was, I feel like their red zone offense has no direction, because they don't know whether or not to decide between, Daniel Jones working the short to intermediate areas of the field in the red zone, or trying to run the football. They should have done more in the red zone. Because in that way, you can see where the frustrations of Daniel Jones can stem from. Because of the fact that you don't really have much to rely upon in terms of efficiency in the red zone. That's where it felt like most of the Giants' problems befell them. And so, while it would be safe to say that this game is an indictment of Daniel Jones and indicative of what his career has looked like for the Giants, it wasn't really all on him. But considering the fact that, other players surrounding him had good offensive performances, like Tyrone Tracy, who had 25 fantasy points on 145 yards on the ground and 1 touchdown, and Darius Slayton, who had 108 yards through the air and 19.8 fantasy points, you should kind of be underwhelmed if you're a Giants fan. But with the fact that your offense had good performances, you still couldn't find the end zone more than once, or really hurt the Steelers' defense in the red zone, because that's where I feel like they needed to take their chances, and it felt like they blew it. This definitely feels like a missed opportunity for this Giants team, but overall, I feel like this game was a perfect example of why, you have to have a solid foundation and identity when you're a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, because you never know when games can get tough out of nowhere. And this game kind of got tough down the stretch for them out of nowhere. But at the end of the day, they just have the resources, they have the weapons to close this out, and that's exactly what they did. But let me know what you think about this game in the comments. Let me know what you think about it from a fantasy perspective in the comments as well. But coming up on the other side after this short break, we'll be looking at the waiver wire. A lot of interesting prospects there for you ahead of Week 9. So you definitely don't want to miss this segment. We'll be right back after this short break.